All right, so today I'm going to show you how you should be taking notes and how to read a textbook. You may not have a lot of experience in this in the past, but I'm assuming you will, especially in this class and then also moving forward into college and things like that. So this is my strategy. So I have a random page here selected for you, and the first thing that I would do is identify where are the chunks of text. So I call these subsections, but basically look for, in Foner's book, these purple texts. Here you can see indentured servants. Okay, I know that this piece here is all going to be talking about indentured servants. Then I have this land and liberty that goes here and down to there. And so just go through and essentially divide these up. These are these chunks of texts. And on your actual notes, I would write indentured servants, and I'm abbreviating here, and then that's where you would contain information about it. The key in reading a textbook is not do you remember every word that it says, but instead do you remember what it says. And there's one really good strategy to implement here, and it's put things in your own words. These words written down are Eric Foner's and his editor's words. They're not yours. You, in order to remember them exactly, are going to have to memorize them, and that's not realistic with a text of this length. What you do remember are your own words, how you think, the type of things you would say, how do you classify things. And so what you want to do is parse through the text, find information that is important, and then kind of put it into your own words. And so that's why I like the idea of summaries. Summaries are where you're collecting information, you're kind of going through it like a gold collector or someone mining for gold, right? This looks like it's important, this looks like it's not, let's toss it away. That way you're refining what is important. By just doing that process, your brain is learning the material. Then when you put it into your own words for a summary, your brain is then acting on that, and it's more likely to then stick in your long-term memory. And even if it doesn't stick in your long-term memory, you now have a shorthand in your summary of stuff that you do know. So let's turn back to our text. So here let's look at this section on indentured servants. Settlers who could pay for their own passage, government officials, clergymen, merchants, artisans, landowning farmers, and members of the lesser nobility arrived in America as free persons. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I know indentured servants, even if you don't know what the word means, you probably can go with, you know what, that doesn't sound free. It sounds a little bit not great. And so he's starting off this passage by saying, these people are free. So let's think about who are these types of people. Government officials, clergymen, merchants, artisans, landowning farmers, and members of the lesser nobility. So there's a very clear delineation on who can be free and who can't. And I think there's also an important part. What makes you free? Is it these titles? And that's not what he says. It's those who could pay their own passage. And so now, and I'm not going to make on my own summary. I'll let you do that because, again, your summary is important. But what I would include first here is people who can pay their way end up being free, which gives the caveat of if you can't pay your way, you're not going to end up free. It also says that these people who come over and pay their own way are most quickly acquired land. And then in the 17th century, however, nearly 2/3 of English settlers came as indentured servants who voluntarily surrendered their passage for a specific time, usually 5 to 7 years, in exchange for passage to America. This is the definition of indentured servants. This is a specific thing, an indentured servant. I'd put that in your note column under specific information. That way you have indentured servants, you have a definition, and you can see exactly how that is. Moving forward, like slaves, servants could be bought and sold, could not marry without the permission of their owner, were subject to physical punishment, and saw their obligation to labor enforced by the courts. This here is showing similarities between slaves and servants. That's a compare and contrast. That's a helpful thing to jot down and be like, how are they like slaves? To ensure uninterrupted work by female servants, the law lengthened the term of their indenture if they became pregnant. Now we're seeing a little bit of an exception if you're a woman. Now you have a quote here. Quote, many Negroes are better used, complained Elizabeth Spriggs, an indentured servant in Maryland, who described being forced to work, quote, day and night, then tied up and whipped. But unlike slaves, servants could look forward to release from bondage. Assuming they survived their period of labor, servants would receive a payment known as freedom dues and become free members of society. So over here, we have similarities. This is how they are like slaves. And then here, we have differences. How are they not like slaves? So If you're doing a summary, you could probably do something as simple as a little T-chart, similarities, difference, or maybe you want a Venn diagram, compare and contrast. Those would be things that you can include. Now, this passage doesn't go a ton into the slave experience, but it does show a little bit of information specifically in looking at indentured servants. You could also then, of course, look back at this information and be like, it's different if you're a woman. And you might want to tuck that one away. Because what I want to stress here is when you're reading this, you should also be trying to engage other things that you know. And so one concept that I'll mention here is the idea of society. Who's in power, who's in charge, who has status, who doesn't. We've already seen in this people who have money, these people, they have status, they have freedom, so they're higher up in society. They have this land that's super important, and we know land's important from previous learning. We also see that there's a similarity between slaves and servants. Look at the things they have. But then we also see that there's some differences. There are freedom dues for these, and there's a specific term. There are these freedom dues that means you're actually getting paid at the end of working as a servant. And that's not what happens to slaves. They don't ever get free. And then we also can see, oh, if you're a woman, that's different as well. All of these put different pecking order elements into what we're trying to figure out is the society at the time. For most of the 17th century, however, indentured servitude was not a guaranteed route to economic autonomy. Given the high death rate, many servants did not live to the end of their terms. Freedom dues were sometimes so meager that they did not enable recipients to acquire land. Many servants found the reality of life in the New World less appealing than they had anticipated. Employers constantly complained of servants running away, not working diligently, or being unruly, all manifestations of what one commenter called their fondness for freedom. So much going on here, and I'm going to kind of start backwards and work up. This thing here, the servants are running away, not working diligently, being unruly. What does that all sound like? Well, those are all things that we know slaves did. This bucking back against this position that you've been forced upon into the economy. So we can connect that a little bit into our similarity. Servants didn't just take this lying down, they pushed back on it. I'm going to erase this here so I can see. There's also this line here, fondness for freedom. The title of this book is Give Me Liberty. This is the story of America. America is all about the concept of I wasn't free and now I want to have freedom. And so what Eric Foner's showing you is, hey, all of the founding fathers that we think of fighting for freedom, they were all these people up here, the ones who could pay their passage, the one who had high levels in society. And we look at that and we're like, yeah, fight for your freedom. But these people down here, these servants, these slaves, are also trying to get freedom. And history doesn't work out the same way for them that it does the founding fathers. And then you also have some stuff here that I'm going to call nuance. You'll hear me talk about this a whole bunch in the course, but the idea is it's not just black and white. Making that T-chart of being like, this is a servant, this is a slave, there you go, that's it, isn't enough. Because if you were having an argument with someone and they were trying to say that servants actually had a great life because, look, they get their freedom dues, they get passage over something they couldn't afford, and then they get to move on and be autonomous and have their own economic power. You would then go, well, sure, some may have, but then you can look at these lines. It's not a guaranteed route to autonomy. There's a high death rate for these servants, so they didn't even end up living. And then freedom dues were sometimes really small, and then they didn't actually let you get land. And then some people just didn't like the life that was there. And that's a way that you're bringing nuance into a conversation. So this is a strategy that I recommend you do. And I'm obviously making this a little bit longer because I'm going beat by beat to show you how to do it. You will get much better at this skill through time. And you really can be taking the notes simultaneously or making your summary simultaneously. And again, I want to take a second. You kind of go through this passage. You create your own summary. I do want to stress, you don't want to rewrite everything because then that takes way too long. You want to get to the point where you're able to condense the information in a shorthand way that makes sense to you, but also does contain that nuance. And that's the struggle. How can I get across the main point while also including this kind of specific nuancy stuff?